CRM. My name is Olesea and I'm brand manager of Nightrush. I'm delighted to be joined today by Konstantin Pellmann, head of CRM operations at Hybrid Interaction, a leader in CRM strategies for the iGaming industry. Today we're diving into critical topic of data-driven CRM, enhancing the player's engagement in iGaming. Konstantin, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with the basics. Konstantin, can you explain what CRM is in the context of iGaming and why it's so crucial for enhancing player experience?
Sure. I think fundamentally, iGaming or not iGaming, CRM, it's not one thing. If you look at CRM, I look at it more as an accumulation of individual components which essentially enhance the overall player experience. Now, that said, I think the way you approach or the way you understand CRM is more an organizational structure aspect or where you stand as an operation. Because depending on that, your definition for a CRM will automatically vary. Yeah. So what do I mean by that? So say you're a tier 1 operator, you have your CRM department, 5, 6, 7, 8 people within that department. Now, not everyone will be doing the same job. So what do I mean by that? So within that department structure, you will have your individual silos, may it be data analytics, promo planning, promo setup, liaising with the customer support, someone does email marketing, someone does content. So automatically by that, each and everyone within that team will have a different understanding of CRM. Now, of course, the entire team, it caters to that umbrella term CRM, but the operational aspect from a day-to-day perspective will vary. Yeah. Now, if you look at another structure where perhaps analytics is outsourced to the BI department, perhaps some promo types is outsourced to the product department. So in that scenario, what really happens is you trim the entire operation, CRM operation, down to the executional level, which also means that from an execution level, the only thing you would actually take care of is replacing an image in the email, setting up the bonus, adding it to the flow in the CRM tool, and then executing it. Yeah, they're not right or wrong approaches. They're simply different approaches. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, you have the operator which just opened shop, meaning hired X amount of people, signed the deal with the platform, signed the deal with the tool. So out of that already, CRM becomes everything that is not related to HR, finance, compliance, customer support. That said, that everything you need to define. And I think that everything with the operator which just opened shop is pretty much, you're part of the integration with the tool. You're part of setting up the back office. You're part of setting up the CMS. You're part of a system audit. You do end-to-end testing. And only in the last instance, you actually take care of your life cycles and promotions. So if you compare these three scenarios, in each and every of these scenarios, you're exposed to complete different elements that essentially do contribute to that umbrella term of CRM. So that's sort of my approach to how I view CRM.
Data is a major driver in CRM operations today. How does Hybrid Interaction approach data collection and analysis to optimize CRM strategies and improve the player journey?
So I think here we need to sort of distinguish between the types of projects that we have. Yeah. So on one hand, we have the projects where it's an existing operation, where data is provided. The other side is projects which just have launched. Okay, so with projects which have just launched, you do not have any data. You need to wait a couple of months to actually get significant data to act upon. Now with operations which are already existing for months or years, it's completely different. You have the access to data. It's easier to act upon. Now, from a CRM strategy perspective, or from a question of how do you use data? Yeah, so look at it from this perspective, like if you do a minute-by-minute conversion analysis, yeah, you're trying to understand at what point do users convert minute by minute after registering. In order to do that, you need data. So what data would you need? You need to understand when the user registers. You need to understand at what point in time the user actually makes their first deposit. So without that, how can I do anything? I cannot. Likewise, for example, if you look at CRM tools which offer missions, challenges, or whatever you want to call them, you need to be able to understand how these missions perform. Do they perform? Do they not perform? Do they perform better on one day than on another? Is there a correlation between people using or opting in for a mission in the morning versus in the evening? So there's so much that goes into it to actually be like, okay, how do you work with data? Where do you approach it? How do you approach it? When does it make sense to look at it? When does it not make sense to look at it?
One of the main goals of data-driven CRM is to personalize the player experience. How do you use player data to personalize interactions, and what benefits does this bring to both the player and the operators?
So when it comes to personalization, I somewhat view it a bit more critical. Not because I'm not for it, but because of the implications that it has on operational level. So what do I mean by that? So first of all, you have to define for yourself what do you even mean with personalization. Also, where do you start? Where do you end? Also, you need to allow yourself to have the understanding that whilst you put in all the effort and allocate resources to create this infrastructure to personalize whatever experience you can personalize, it does not automatically conclude that it will contribute to your bottom line the way you think it will. So, I mean, that's a trade-off that you need to make. And I think the third component is, it's great to talk about ideas on trade shows and in boardrooms, but incorporating these ideas is mostly a complete different thing, especially when it comes to allocation of resources. It's not always just a click. It's mostly a click and a couple of months of what's going on. So, it's a 50-50 thing. But I mean, look, if you look at the CRM tools across the board, the majority of them are able to cater to factors such as favorite product, favorite bonus, preferred method of communication, best time to send, and so on. So you have the infrastructure in place. Now, just because you have the infrastructure in place does not mean that the implication on your operational side is one-to-one. So if we look at those individual factors individually, we can look at preferred product. So it's clear that if I know that the user is a sportsbook user, I can cater to that user from a sportsbook perspective. Likewise, I can cater to a casino user with casino content communications. So great. I think the tricky part is when you sort of look at preferred bonus types. Now, at least from an automation perspective, what do I mean by that? So if you look at free spins, for example, each operator has a game catalog of thousands of games. Now the question is, do you make time and try to cater to each and every user profile and make sure that each and every user gets rewarded with what they play and what they enjoy playing? Yes, no. Are there any dependencies for this? Meaning, do I have a direct integration with the game provider? Yes, no. If so, then it makes it a lot more easy because probably you can utilize the free spins across the entire catalog. Whereas if perhaps you're integrated via a game aggregator, the question becomes, do I even have access to all the games? And if so, am I even able to set up free spins for the games that the game aggregator provides to me? So there's so much more going into it than saying, hey, okay, let's personalize this, let's personalize that, and it's smooth sailing. So it's relative, yeah. For sportsbook, for example, it's also relatively tricky because as a sportsbook user, I might bet on whatever comes in front of me, especially when it comes to live betting. I might not even really care what I'm betting on, but a very active user might be betting on China volleyball second division or Uganda football third division. From a content perspective, how do you personalize that? Because essentially the bet slip selection might have been completely random. So there is this somewhat a trade-off of understanding how much time does it need to set up this infrastructure and getting a feel for where do I get some return of investing resources versus it might just be cosmetics. So yeah. When you look at email communication or communication overall, I think it does definitely help to understand, hey, user A prefers getting an email at 10 in the evening versus 8 in the morning, so you can cater to that. But I do think that one needs to consider life as a whole, not from just a user perspective, but from a consumer perspective. It's like I finish work, I go to the supermarket, I might not even know I'm getting the email. In that moment, I care more about what my breakfast is rather than do I have a 100% deposit match in my inbox. So whilst on technical level it sounds really great, the nuance of life, especially from a, I guess, gamble perspective, is it's more about the do I make the decision in the moment to act upon the communication or not? So again, there's pros and cons that go into the decision of personalization, because, and I'll tell you why. So the flip side of that is, last year we worked on a project with a Belgian operator, very established, and they weren't necessarily big on personalization. Nothing wrong with it. And the question was, well, why not? So basically, they had a offer pickup rate of 90% plus on their base without personalizing offers. So again, the question is, if you're giving something for free away, do you really need to personalize it? Or because it's for free, the user will take it either way?
Interesting, actually, case. And I would say that maybe...
Okay. Let me ask you this question. So,
okay.
What's the last airline that you flew with when you went somewhere?
Airline, Air Baltic.
Okay, so Air Baltic, right? So you purchased the ticket with Air Baltic, and now every now and then you will get an email from Air Baltic. The point that I'm trying to make is also how much significance do you give it from an email marketing perspective? Do you look at it from a, yes, I want to personalize this email communication or any other type of communication, and I need the user to respond? Or you tackle the entire topic of, it's more about being present in the user's inbox, so that in the event, in your case, you fly again, you will be, okay, you know what? I'm going to go to Air Baltic's webpage and look what there is. Yeah, and just because I do not act every time the email comes from Air Baltic, it does not mean that that promotion was not successful, because you only have so many days of holiday, you have only so much disposable income. So again, it depends on how you view this entire interaction. What's the intent behind the communication actually being sent?
Player retention is key in iGaming, but how can CRM strategies back-end by data contribute to building long-term player loyalty?
So first and foremost, the tools we work on are the tools that the operator or the project has to their disposal. So we do not have our own tools that we say we put a layer on top, because it would just add another layer of complexity to it. So, I mean, look, most CRM tools anyway have the data studios. So it's more a matter of working with the data studios, understanding how these data studios work. Do you get the right data into them? Sometimes you need to ensure that the right data points are mapped out. Not always data point A equals data point A in the tool. So then it's about, how do you remap these data points? What can you do to optimize there?
What CRM tools and technologies do you use at Hybrid Interaction to gather, analyze, and act on data? How do you ensure these tools are integrated effectively into the iGaming ecosystem?
I think first and foremost, you need to understand who you are as an operator, and also understand how you communicate. It's the voice of tone and the branding. Yeah, if that isn't in sync, it won't help you much. Likewise, CRM is just one component of the operation. So if your customer support isn't on point, if your payments aren't on point, a well-defined CRM strategy will also not get you where you need to be. Now, that being said, say you have an operator with a loyalty program. Now, data will help me understand whether or not the users are progressing, if there's a blocker, and if there's a blocker, why is there a blocker? So based on that, then I can say, you know what, I will adjust my strategy, or in turn the loyalty program, to make sure, or try to make sure that the user progresses accordingly. And without the data, you're flying blind, and there's only so much that you can freestyle with your experience, up until the point that you're limited in your experience because you bump into topics you might have not encountered before without actually looking into the data. Another example would be sweepstakes. So in sweepstakes, you do not deposit, you purchase. And because you purchase, you add a value to whatever package you purchase, right? So in sweepstakes, you have your gold coins and your sweep coins, and those are mostly bundled, and you can purchase them. Now, with data, what it will do is it will allow me to understand what packages are being purchased, what packages are not being purchased. It lets me understand, do I need to change pricing of these packages? And it will give me a better understanding of sort of the price elasticity of demand for these individual packages. So again, without data, you're flying blind. With data, it just lets you, I guess, maneuver the operation in a more feasible manner.
AI and machine learning are becoming increasingly prominent in CRM strategies. How are these technologies being used in the iGaming industry to predict player behavior and improve CRM effectiveness?
So I think with AI, I think the simplest answer is yes, it works for everything. But I think moreover, it's not a matter of using it, but understanding or learning how to use it. Okay. And I think from a predictive perspective, and it somehow goes back to the personalization aspect that we just spoke about. For example, when it comes to delivery, meaning user A will get an email at 7 p.m. in the evening because the user does not engage with emails in the morning. User B will get a push notification at 7 p.m. because after 7 p.m. the user just does not engage with emails. Likewise, user C will get an SMS because the user has ignored 5 emails previously to that. So I guess from a prediction perspective, it can definitely help. Same goes for content, for example. Like say up until a year ago or 2 years ago, you would send translations to an agency, they would do the translations, then you have to review the translations. Is the tone of voice implemented the way you as a brand want it to be implemented? I think with AI, if you teach AI, if you prompt AI, and if you sort of are able to communicate your tone of voice into AI, then it reduces the entire time that you need to actually generate content which the user can relate to your brand. Now, that said, just because AI decreases the time spent on certain tasks and responsibilities, does not mean that we need to blindly agree to everything that AI gives us. And I think it must be put an emphasis on. So I look at this from an operational perspective. I look at it as, yes, go work with AI, but if you do not have the capability of deconstructing the response that AI gives you, or if it's so abstract, the answer that AI give you, then you need to reevaluate why you're using it in the first place.
I would say that then in CRM, it also needs to be taught, and it could be used as a help tool, but not as a fully functional tool.
No, I don't think it's a matter of AI sort of replacing execution. I think it's more about learning to design the implementation. I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but that's how I see it evolving.
While data-driven CRM brings tremendous benefits, it can also come with its own, let's say, set of challenges. What are some of the key challenges you face when implementing data-driven CRM strategies in iGaming?
When you start setting up things, you don't necessarily have an indication of what works, what does not work, okay? And so you need to have a look at the data. Now, that said, you will adjust something based on what the data suggests, but at some point you also need to get a feeling for when do you stop with the approach versus do I continue with the approach because I believe the data is right and I will continue with that approach. So I think it's more about sort of the decision making behind it. What's your starting point from analyzing bottom up, top down? For example, with all these tools, they all have these gamification features left, right, and center. The question is, am I using the tool right? In what context am I analyzing the performance? Do I even evaluate the performance from the right perspective? And if I do evaluate it from one perspective, if I then adjust something, does it affect something else or not? So the difficult part about sort of looking at data is, one, there might be some times where there's too much data. Where do you start? Where do you stop? Do you understand that if you change something here, it might affect something elsewhere?
Interesting. And data privacy and compliance are crucial, especially in regulated industries like iGaming. How do you navigate the regulatory landscape and ensure that player data is handled responsibly while still optimizing CRM strategies?
So I think from a regulatory perspective, it's quite straightforward for us on operational level because we get the information, what can be done, what cannot be done from the project. I think from a data privacy perspective, like absolutely no care about email addresses, phone numbers, and the likes, because it's not a factor for providing a solid infrastructure. So from that perspective, if we do request data, then it's about masking that data, because we do not need the individual information of the user. We need the KPIs, not the actual name and not anything related to that. So I think on operational level, it's quite straightforward.
Looking ahead, what do you think are some of the, let's say, trends in CRM for the iGaming industry? Are there any exciting developments or innovation you're particularly excited about?
The one thing I genuinely look to is actually mobile games and how they operate from a live ops perspective. I think there's a lot to learn from. However, I guess the complicated part here is understanding that there are two different user profiles. Yeah, so with mobile games, the user can play for free. With iGaming, with the product we have, you have to deposit, so it's real money. So I think, and what makes the mobile game space so interesting is the features that they implement with their live ops, which is now more and more coming to front with majority of CRM tools in terms of the features that one can implement. And again, it somewhat goes back to one of the previous questions of, or one of the responses I gave with how do I analyze a feature? Is it working the way you need it to work? Is it not working the way you need it to work? And I think a lot can be done there.
As players become more tech savvy, they have higher expectations when it comes to personalization and engagement. How do you see CRM evolving to meet these expectations in the upcoming years?
It's a tricky one, and the reason why I say that is because from a product perspective, more and more things are developed, maybe features, components of a page, and whatnot, which is great. You can work with more. However, the downside is, or the trade-off that needs to be made is what is enough and what is too much. Yeah, so tech savvy, left, right, and center, that's all great. And I think within the crypto space, we see that tech savviness. We see that, certain operators try to create their own tokens and trying to actually distribute them amongst their own users. So a certain segment does require or is looking for that technological edge, whilst another segment might have no care for it. So I guess it's, again, understanding who is your user base and how can you communicate with your user base with whatever tools you are provided with.
Agree. And before we wrap everything up, Konstantin, what would you say is the most important thing iGaming operators should focus on when implementing CRM strategies?
I think it's, define properly what your objective is and have a clear understanding of what you will measure that strategy by. It's test, but don't test for the sake of testing, but test for the sake of better decision making.
Perfect. For anyone listening who wants to get into CRM or improve their CRM strategies, what advice would you give to newcomers or industry professionals looking to enhance their knowledge in CRM?
I think the most important part is to be curious. I think if you're not curious in any field, then I find it tricky to find someone or hire someone who's not curious. I mean, look at other products, look at other industries, get a feel for procedures of other products and services. I think the way I tell myself is if you have the ability to recognize certain patterns or certain procedures that you yourself implement, then that's, it gives you a competitive edge. And I think being curious, looking into other products, regardless of what industry, you learn something from it. And you might think, okay, well, in the first instance, maybe it's not applicable to what I do just because it's a different product. But the idea is to understand if it creates value on another product or another industry, product or service, it's about translating that understanding if it can bring value to your own operation.
Thank you so much, Konstantin, for joining me today and sharing your insights into data-driven CRM.
Thank you for having me.
To our listeners, I hope today's conversation has given you valuable insights. Be sure to subscribe to our social media channels to not miss anything interesting. Stay tuned for more.